Alright, so in that last video, I state my case for why I would like to be allowed a chance to live in peace. I, I will now talk about how I don't feel it's morally, ethically justifiable to continue living in the United States in a city, in that industrialized, fossil fuel dependent infrastructure. So the problem that I want to talk about first is overpopulation. World population. Most of that growth is in developing countries. In developed countries, what you see is that the population has cultural changes, healthcare changes, structure changes in society, like the family unit changes to where people don't want to have as many children, on average. So you have cases like Japan where generally you have a decline in population because more people are dying than are being born. But these developed countries like the United States, even Japan, those first world countries as they call them, they consume much more energy than the developing countries. They consume so much more energy in terms of hydrocarbons, fossil fuels, and they consume much more electricity, which is mostly coal. You can say renewables are, doing something, but renewable energy has to come from somewhere. Those devices have to be constructed in, industrial factories. They have to have an import of energy that is fossil fuels to dig up the minerals, like the metals, for building a solar panel or a wind turbine, or any other renewable energy like batteries, and that electricity that runs those batteries, mostly coal, like I said. So really the backbone itself is hydrocarbons, and the renewable energies don't account for a significant percentage of that demand. And they won't, because policy and public opinion and culture itself doesn't seem to be headed in that direction. I'm not being pessimistic, I'm just being pragmatic as much as possible, as much as I can. My own thinking is, biased, but I think I'm making a fair estimate that people will not bring about that change in their culture or their institutions to switch to an entirely renewable energy base. Something that hints at that is that they favor these industrialized, centralized models, like solar power plants. Let's build it out in the desert. There's enough land there. Nobody's using it. It's shown that giant farms for wind and solar or tidal energy do not have a constant output. If these energies were distributed, spread out in urban populations, or, just spread out in general, they would see a much more stable, maybe a lower energy return, but much more stable energy return. But I don't see that. So returning to the issue, which is population growth, the developed world is consuming much more than the developing world, even though much more of the population is seen in the developing world. And the trends indicate that the developing world is starting to catch up. They want to, have commodities like running water, electricity, heating, cooling, and automobiles and these infrastructures that depend on hydrocarbons. And it's only fair that they should have these things. It's only fair because the developed world has already had these things. And for some countries, for centuries or decades before the developing world even started to get these technologies. You have more people in rural India with smartphone technology than access to, sanitary restrooms. Most of the world doesn't even have toilet paper, running water. And so the population issue is a problem because we're also reaching a point where the world reserves of natural fresh water are being depleted. Aquifers are drying up, lakes, rivers, you name it, we're running out. Most of that water goes to agriculture. Most of that agriculture benefits the first world. Food does not get distributed in a fair and rational manner to the developing world. And so you see a lot of starvation, a lot of malnutrition, and it's due to this inequality of the first world favoring itself. In the first world, or developed countries, they want to have meat and dairy and other animal products that take up energy, they take up time and care, and they take up calories, they take up resources. These animals have to eat. You know what they eat? They eat food that could be fed to the developing world, that could be fed to people who have nothing to eat. People that most of the time are trying to make money to feed themselves by growing that food that will be then fed to somebody's burger. We have a problem with depleting topsoil. This Western model of agriculture, favors putting in artificial fertilizers into the soil, which kills the microfauna and bloats the plant. It's not an effective way of sustaining agriculture. It collapses ecosystems and it pollutes the oceans. You see a high influx of nitrogen and phosphorus into the ocean that is unprecedented because all these fossil fuels have produced all these fertilizers, and these fertilizers aren't staying in the soil. They leach out, when it rains or when they irrigate, and not only the fertilizers leach, but the animals, the livestock's, waste, their fecal matter washes out, and that causes algal blooms and die-offs in the ocean, and it also feeds into the acidification of the ocean. Another thing that Western agriculture favors is mass-scale methods. They don't like polycultures, growing multiple species of plants together. They favor just one plant over swaths of land, and I'm running out of time here. And this increases the vulnerability, the instability of the system, because climate change is going to happen. There's no political, there's no, Kyoto Accords or, climate change policy that's going to change that climate change is happening. It's happening. It's going to happen. It's irreversible because the greenhouse gases are already emitted. They're already in the atmosphere. They're already wreaking havoc. One study indicates that, or suggests that, we'll start seeing drastic effects in the tropics, mainly increasing temperatures, possibly changes in rainfall patterns in 2020, and it will be reversible from that point. More northern latitudes will start seeing effects by 2047. So the countries generally which are developed nations are in those higher latitudes, and they won't see such a drastic effect to their infrastructures, their agriculture, or their economies directly, because they're shielded. How convenient. They are the primary contributors to climate change. And I'm running out of time here, but I'll just make another video. Yeah. Anyway, this is going to take a while to load. I probably won't load it immediately, and it's not like I have much of an audience. It'll probably just be me going back and trying to remember, what I was talking about, what I was thinking about at the time. I don't have the charismatic qualities of somebody who could, get feedback and, hits on YouTube. Even though these are things that should be discussed, people generally don't want to discuss them, even if I had that, personality to help.